Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa presents Soul Healing Sundays, the podcast, with Dr. Susan Crockett. You are listening to episode number 33, Sufficiency Mindset. This episode is dedicated to all those who need more love in their lives, which is basically all of us.
Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, where women learn to love their lives. Do you find yourself frustrated by society's expectations? Looking for practical advice on how to discover your talents and level up your life? You found the right place. Here's your host, U.S. News top doctor, robotic surgeon, and certified life coach, Dr. Susan Crockett.
Hello, my virtuosas. I'm your host, Dr. Susan Crockett. You can call me Sue as long as we're chatting on the podcast. Since I'm not your doctor today, I'm just chatting with you and teaching you, hopefully bringing you something that'll help heal your soul. Did you notice that we changed the title of the podcast and we've shifted it to Sundays? How about that? So we've made a decision to shift the Wednesday Becoming Virtuosa podcasts to Sundays and to call them Soul Healing Sundays, since that's kind of what we're doing, is we're working on healing our spirit, our soul, our minds, and so this just kind of fits better. Plus, y'all, I'm ashamed to tell y'all this, but I'm a huge procrastinator. I am. I seem so diligent when I look at, I'm on podcast number 33 in 33 weeks, but y'all, this is not natural to me. And I've driven Pavel just about crazy not getting my podcast in on time. So today I've actually recorded 3 podcasts. This is the third one that I'm recording, but it's actually the first of the next 3. So I recorded the next 2 interviews and this one today. So it's Labor Day. It's been a beautiful day here. I've spent my Labor Day laboring. Haha, how funny as an OBGYN. I was laboring on Labor Day. Not that kind of laboring. Anyway, Ollie's sitting behind me as always, my little dog Ollie, who is my constant companion, my little helper. And I'm glad that you could join us today for our first of many Soul Healing Sundays. So in today's show, we're going to be talking about sufficiencies. Sufficiency mindset. So let's just think about this for a second. We're going to talk about sufficiency and learning a mindset of sufficiency and all the things that we think we lack. How many times a day, I bet you couldn't even count, even if you had a clicker counter, how many times a day do you think, I don't have enough, or there isn't enough, or I need more? I need more love. I need more energy. I don't have enough food. I don't have enough freedom. I don't have enough opportunity or respect or power or money or beauty or influence or fame or education or sex or exercise or work or sex or profits or leisure time or toys or whatever. All of that stuff. Constantly we're thinking, I don't have enough. I don't have enough rest. If it's not enough rest, it's not enough things to do. Anyway. That's where we're going for today, is we're going to have some soul healing on this issue of scarcity and lack. And as always, we're going to have a lesson and then we're going to have an exercise at the end for you guys, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so we're going to start with the definition of sufficiency. Sufficiency is having an adequate amount of something, especially of something essential. So we typically think of it as like food or money or shelter. And it can also mean self-sufficiency or independence, being self-sufficient woman, which is all great and fine, but that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the opposite of lack. And it's kind of like abundance, right? It's the opposite of lack or scarcity. But it is not a glass half empty or half full. So if you saw me post on my Facebook page earlier this week, we did a 5-part little mini course series on my Facebook page leading up to today's podcast. So you can go check that out if you want. It's Sue Ulsta Crockett. That's my Facebook page, and it's public. You can see whatever's on there. Anyway, I posted a post on Monday. It's an overview of this course, what we're talking about. And I posted this really funny picture about a whole bunch of glasses half full and how different types of ways of thinking and philosophies may look at it. It's pretty funny, cute. But the point is that there is no glass. There is no half empty, half full. There's no constraint. It's artificial. We put it there. There's not. It doesn't exist. It's kind of like there's no pie. Like we're all struggling to get our piece of the pie and not let everybody take what we've got. And we only think that there's a limited amount of resource and we have to fight over it and it's scarce and life is not a pie. There is no pie. That's a huge myth. And we're going to talk about that too. So let's start with the great pie myth. So when I first started my OBGYN practice, I was part of several groups before I started my own practice, but one of the common recurring themes that I see in medical practice is this idea of getting our patients. Like, I needed to get my patient load. It was my patient lists. I controlled it as a source of ongoing income. It was where I got my surgical cases from, my OB cases. We built up our patient list. And in the old practice of medicine, the old model of medicine, which has pretty much gone by the wayside now, those patient charts were the practice. So that when a physician got older, he sold the asset, which was the patient charts, or how many patients you had, to the next physician. And that was the asset in the practice. That's largely gone away now. Patients go all over the place whenever they want, and they're directed by insurance. And so the whole practice model of that getting your patient load and your piece of the pie is starting to fade. But there's still a lot of quote unquote competition for patients, as if there's a limit to how many patients there are. At first, you might think, well, there are, like, there's only a limited number of patients in a population. And then what you realize is that we are constantly creating ways to engage with people and their health and to offer better support and better health. And it's not a pie. There's constantly people coming in. Our population is expanding. You don't have to fight for your piece. Like, it's overflowing. So the piece of the pie is a great myth. There is not a scarcity pie. A lot of you are mothers. And as an OB, I've certainly delivered my share of children and taken care of lots and lots of moms. So do you remember when you were a mom for the first time and you thought, oh, I've got this one child. I love them more than life itself. I could never love anybody any more than this child. And then you got pregnant with your second one. And you're like, oh no, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to split my love. And then you remember what happened? The second one was born and your love expanded. It grew. You didn't love the first one any less, and you loved the second one even more and more. So this is a great example of how love is not a pie. It's created. It grows. We create it. It comes through us and flows through us, and our creative power is what grows it in our lives. So it is with everything in our lives. Everything that I listed off at the very beginning of the podcast that we feel like we have lack in, it's all flowing through us. There is no pie. You can name any of those things. There is not scarcity. So I've got a quote for y'all from Paul Zeitler. There is a natural law of abundance which pervades the entire universe, but it will not flow through a doorway of belief and lack and limitation. Let me say that again. It will not flow through a doorway of belief in lack and limitation. So what we believe, what we choose to think, we've talked so much about the CTFAR model and how our thoughts create our feelings, create our actions, create our results. Life flows through us. Abundance in every area flows with the laws of the natural laws of the universe. It pervades everything, and it will not flow through us, the doorway into us and through us and into expansion and creation, if we are sitting there in belief of lack and limitation. So today I'm going to talk about 5 primary lacks in our own life. If you've joined me on the Facebook course, I did a day for each one, just for a little short course, but we're going to talk about each one here. And the 5 primary lacks that I'm going to address today are lack of time, money, health or beauty, capacity, which are defined as power, respect, ability, influence, or fame. And the 5th one is love. So time, money, health, capacity, and love. And one of the big reasons that we feel lack in these 5 areas in our life is that we don't know when we're full. We, as a society, have lost the ability to tell when we are full, when we have had enough, when we have sufficient. And then it results in overindulging or over holding on to things, hoarding, like toilet paper, other things that we have way more than we need to at times, when we actually have enough to be sufficient. So we create lack, or we create scarcity in our resources by our belief that we have lack and that we don't know when we're full and we can't judge when we have sufficiency. So here's the big problem with this. Other than consumerism, which takes the focus off of people and society and community and humanity and puts it on things or money as our priority, the really big problem is that when we have a lack or limitation mindset and we're constantly thinking we don't have enough of this or that or the next thing, we run the risk of thinking that we are not enough. Now, I know y'all know what I'm talking about. I have had so many conversations with patients who are moms who are trying to do work at home on Zoom and take care of their kids and take care of their husbands and their families. And there is a really easy line to cross into feeling like there is not enough time, there's not enough resource, there is not enough me, and therefore I am not enough. And I'm here to tell you today that you are everything. You are sufficient. You are more than enough. And you are overflowing in sufficiency. I'm going to help you see that today and help you gain a peace in your soul about this. So let's start with the sufficiency of time. Time doesn't change. It's really interesting because, time is what we assign it in a kind of a false constraint. But in any case, time is a set pattern. It's not something that grows or expands or shrinks, but we think it does by our perception, right? So we think time moves by so slowly when we're doing something really boring, or it flies by when we're doing something really fun, or when we have a deadline for Pavel to turn in the podcast. It seems to fly by where the days go. And sometimes we just don't notice it at all. Like we get so engrossed in what we're doing that it becomes completely irrelevant and we step outside of time into kind of our own existential existence. That happens when you're in the zone. Like if you've ever done sports or music or art or read a good book where you just or sometimes driving even, you look up and you're like, how did I get here? That's that kind of sensation of time. So actually time doesn't change at all. It's our perception or our thoughts about it, right? So the other thing is we can't create more time. There's no such thing. Like what you have to do is carve out the time that you want to prioritize for the things that are important to you. So I'm not going to go super deep into this because actually in 2 weeks, I've done a podcast with Siri Payne on scheduling and increasing your capacity. And so I really want y'all to tune in for that. That was one of the podcasts that I recorded earlier today. But just basically to overcome feeling like we don't have enough time for things, what we really need to do is to schedule ourselves to prioritize our values. Because when we don't schedule and we don't look at what we're spending our time on, we end up spending it on everything. And then it feels like we don't have any time. So what we want to do is recreate ourselves and increase our capacity based on what we prioritize to spend our time on. We have plenty of time to do things that matter the most to us. I've got a really fun story that's one of my favorite stories from, probably, I'd say I was in residency when I first read Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's on my bookshelf somewhere, I think still. Anyway, Stephen Covey does all this time management stuff, old guru of it, and he's got this great story. So basically, here's how the story goes. In class one day, a professor set a large glass jar on the table in front of him and began placing large rocks in it until they reached the top. He asked his students, "Is this jar full?" And in unison, they shouted, "Yes!" And the teacher replied, "Really?" He then grabbed some gravel from under the table and proceeded to dump it into the jar, occasionally shaking it and adding more until the gravel filled the spaces between the rocks. He asked again, "Is the jar full?" This time some nodded yes, and most didn't say a word. The professor reached again under the table and this time pulled out a cup of sand, and he dumped the sand in the jar and asked, "Is it full now?" The students mumbled, "Probably not." He smiled wryly and then poured a nearby glass of water into the jar until it brimmed to the top, and he declared, "Now it's full." His points to the students was that there is almost always more one can fit into his or her jar. But prioritization requires us to decide what to add first. If the professor had not placed the large rocks in the jar before the gravel, sand, and water, they wouldn't have fit. Small items would have consumed the space. We often forget this lesson at work, filling our schedules daily with the minutia. Doing this jeopardizes our achieving the bigger objectives. We have to remember big rocks come first, then fill in only the smaller items that support those larger objectives. So I love the story. I actually have an even funnier story of how this played out in real life in the hospital. So a couple years ago now, it's been about 6 years, I joined the staff at Northeast Methodist Hospital in San Antonio. And at that time, it was a pretty small community hospital. And there was a new CEO there and a new physician advocate and really small, very tight-knit OR. Physicians were a really tight-knit community. They'd all been there for a long time, or most of them, and they knew it. And they knew each other really well. And, it's the kind of place that staff has been there for 20, 30 years, and they love being there. So when I came in, I couldn't get OR time. I couldn't get operating room time. So in the operating room, as surgeons, we get is what's called block time. You see where I'm going with this, right? Blocks, right? So in most places, we have block time based on how much surgery we can guarantee and produce and manifest for the hospital. So it works in both ways. It works in a surgeon's favor because you get your protected time to schedule your cases, and it works in the hospital's favor because then you have your time filled up. So I walked into the OR and I'd been asked to take over or start a robotics surgery program there. I became the director of the robotics program, and then also to start women's health at this hospital that had been dormant for about 20 years. And I walked into the OR and looked at the board and I'm like, well, show me your block schedule. And they laughed at me. It didn't exist. It's just like whoever wants the OR whenever. So I could not get enough space to block my time. And we kind of went round and round, kind of funny, haha, with administration and talked about it. And then one day I had enough of it. And I remembered this Stephen Covey story, and I got a mason jar. I found these blocks that look like the ABC blocks that little kids play with. And I put them in the jar and it filled it up. And then I put Skittles in around it. And then I took Pixie Sticks candy and I poured it in around it. And I put it on my CEO's desk. He must have thought I was crazy. I put it on his desk with the Stephen Covey story and then a little note that said, blocks, get it? Block time, please. My point was you have to schedule the blocks in first. You have to schedule the priority or the block time first, and then you fill in all the other spaces with the smaller cases. And of course, that's what we did. And now we've got flourishing OR, a great robotics program. And anyway, all that to tell y'all that when it comes to not having enough time, if you learn to schedule and prioritize based on your blocks, the big things that are important to you, it makes the whole rest of it better. And suddenly your time feels sufficient. So the second thing we're going to talk about is sufficiency of money. So money is really interesting. A lot of people have this idea that you need to earn it and work for it and collect it and hoard it and have enough of it and have more than enough of it. And particularly in our society, it's really interesting to watch. The really interesting thing about money is that no matter how much or how little you have of it, you always seem to want more. You always think that it would be easier when you have more. So I see people who make $30,000 a year who want $35,000 a year, and then everything would be great. And then I see people who make $300,000 a year think, oh, if I only had $350,000 a year, then life would be great. And then I know millionaires and billionaires, they all have the same problems, and they are all having the same levels of anxiety about managing it and not having it. And having the money doesn't fix it. So the scarcity mindset is pervasive amongst the different levels of financial wealth in our society. So here's how I like to think about money. And my investment advisor, he makes fun of me on this. That's okay, Hugh. You can do that. That's fine. I think money circulates. I think it circulates like breath. Like we breathe in air, we breathe out air. It comes in, it goes out. I think all of these things that we're talking about that we worry about having lack in are things that circulate, and money does too. It can be created. People fight over it. They kill over it. They prioritize it above people. Wars are fought over it. So how much is sufficient, and how do you get to a sufficiency mindset when it comes to money? Well, according to my investment advisor, Hugh, I'm way behind for my age and where I am in my business and life and all of that. So I'm like, okay. But I'm way ahead of where my parents were at my age. So my dad was just starting his business and was nowhere near what I am right now. So in my mind, I'm way ahead. And then there are people who have a scarcity mindset about money, and they want to take money from the people that have more than them. And then there's other people that just sit and suffer in their lack and just have anxiety and they can't meet their bills, and they just suffer in that lack and that mentality. What I've come to is a place to settle into where I have sufficiency. Nobody can take it from me. I'm breathing it out anyway. It comes in, it goes out. I can create more. I know how to have a business. I know how to create more. The whole thing could come crashing down. In fact, it has. I completely failed miserably at a business in the early 2000s. And you know what? I know how to make more. So I'm self-sufficient in that way. And it gives me freedom. It gives me freedom from having anxiety and stress about lack and where is it going to come from. It's just money. It's just money. So the big cure is charity. So if we're breathing in and breathing out, charity is the metaphor. How do we know when we have enough? How do we decide when to give to others? Most people wait until they're in a position of excessive finances to start giving to others. But I'm going to suggest to you that real sufficiency practice, so this breathing and breathing out way of being, starts earlier. So in our churches, they talk about tithing or giving. And this is part of the principle, other than taking care of the church financially and responsibility. The principle of giving or having that charity and having money flow in and out and between people is part of how our gifts interact with each other and how our world works. That's the sufficiency of money cure. It's charity, giving. All right, let's talk about scarcity in health and beauty. This is something that becomes more and more difficult as women age. I see women coming into my practice in their 40s and 50s, and it's really a pivotal point in their life where they're either starting to give up and give into unhealthy habits and decline, and you start seeing their bodies break down, their minds break down, they sit down, and that's the kind of old age they have, or you see them thriving and being active and eating healthy and moving and engaged in love and life and having that abundance mindset, even though their bodies are still aging. So I want to ask you about this. Like, have you ever looked back at pictures of yourself when you were younger and you thought, wow, she was really young, or she was beautiful, or she wasn't as fat as I thought she was at the time. And you remember how you thought about yourself at that time. And you look at yourself now and from your future self, look back at your past self and you're like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? So that's a really interesting exercise to do, because you can also play that forward. Like, you can pretend that you're looking at yourself from your future self 15 years into the future, and you can share that appreciation, gratitude of yourself and how you are and how you look and just how you show up in the world the way you are now. And you can also start applying that gratitude to appreciating your body. So y'all who've listened to me for any length of time know that I've got a bad thing with Cheetos. I have a bad Cheetos habit. That's my thing. Well, it used to be my thing. So a funny story, about 3 weeks ago, I started working on myself becoming healthier with my diet and exercise. And I had just gotten to a place where I'm like over it. I've really struggled with it for a long time. And I've never been like seriously overweight, but I've, for the last 3 years or so, I've been stable, but I've just had those few extra pounds, like 30, that I've wanted to get off. And the Cheetos just have not been helping it at all. Right. So I realized that I was coming from a scarcity mindset. Like, I was going to have to deprive myself as Cheetos, and I hated how my body looked. And I had a fear that my blood pressure was going to be bad, or that I was unattractive, or that I would lose my ability to do things with my kids. And you know where all of that thinking got me? Nowhere. It got me nowhere. And so once I started appreciating my body and having gratitude for what I am and where I am and wanting to take care of it, I've dropped 14 pounds. 14 pounds, y'all. And I feel great. And I have the desire to exercise more and to move more and engage more in life. And the body reinforces its own progress. You start to see small changes and you think, I've got a little bit of muscle there and a little cut there and less fat there. And here's the thing is I've lost my desire for Cheetos, like completely. I went into the surgeon's lounge today doing rounds this morning. I forgot to look at the Cheetos. They're all sitting there on a rack with the other chips and I didn't even think to look at them. So it's not like I'm sitting there white knuckling the urge to have them. I don't even care about them at all. And this is the freedom that I want to teach you guys about. This is possible for you to actually not have a desire for these things that you don't want to have. So what I've learned is that my body and my health and my physical, how I appear, they're sufficient. Like God has made me the way I am. I might not like my, chubby cheeks, but my patients love my smile and my crinkly eyes. They're not crinkly really, but like my eyes have a very sincere look because they're hooded. I've been told that a whole lot. So it's part of my persona and how they relate to me and they see me as a physician. And so for me to be hypercritical about my face or how I look, it just doesn't serve anybody. So I'm going to suggest that the cure for scarcity in health and beauty is gratitude for your current body and gratitude for what it can do and for taking care of it for the years to come so that it can continue to serve you the way you want it to serve you. So let's talk about scarcity in capacity. This is also one that I'm just barely going to touch on. Capacity, I kind of rolled in power, respect, influence, and ability into these things. Capacity is our ability to have influence in the world around us, our capacity to handle things that we couldn't handle before. We are continually, hopefully, growing. If you're listening to this podcast and becoming virtuoso or reaching for the best version of yourself, then we're continually growing or expanding and enlarging our circle, trying to increase our capacity. So what I can handle now, this is a great example. Y'all know from my very first podcast that I was like, okay, here we go. I'm not a podcaster. I'm becoming a podcaster. So that was a big, obvious step of moving up in capacity. But that capacity is continuing to grow as I respond to the calling of what I'm supposed to be doing. So there's some really cool stuff coming up in February down the line, a couple months from now, that's requiring me to learn how to increase my capacity. So what's the cure for that? How do we do that other than listening to my podcasts so that you learn how to transform and grow and manage your mind, which is an excellent way to do that? The cure for scarcity and capacity is appreciation. So I mentioned before that Siri Payne and I do a podcast interview on this in 2 weeks. And so I really want you to tune into that. That's why I'm not going to spend like 30 minutes doing talk about it right now. But basically what we appreciate appreciates. So if you have a feeling that you aren't powerful enough or you don't have enough respect or you don't have enough influence or ability or education, any of those things, what you appreciate appreciates. That's a quote from Lynn Twist, who wrote The Soul of Money. So that's the cure for scarcity and capacity. Now, I've saved the best for last. It's probably the most difficult one, I think, but it's the most universal too, which is scarcity in love. The most primal urge, the most primal desire, the most base urge for all human beings is to be loved. We all want to be loved and to have someone to love. Maybe you've had scarcity of love in your life. Maybe your parents didn't love you the way you needed to be loved, or maybe you don't feel like your husband or your wife loves you the way you want to be loved. Maybe if you're single, you're thinking there aren't enough good men or there are not enough good women. I can't find one to love. I can't find a good one to love. There's also this concept of unrequited love or unsatisfied or unreciprocated love, which can be either an unfulfilled love or a rejection, which can happen. Sometimes we see it in cases in my practice, like fertility cases, where somebody wants to get pregnant really, really badly, and they have this desire, this love for children, and it's not answered. That's a little bit different than a rejection from interaction with another human being, but I think that's still a type of unrequited love. It's an unsatisfied or unclosed desire or love. So one of our most basic primal instincts as humans is to not be separated or outcast from the tribe, to avoid being not included. So the cure is to see love from a sufficiency mindset or an abundance mindset. It is the most powerful, expansive, limitless force in the universe. We are a conduit for love. We are all little mini capacitors for love. We receive it, we magnify it if we allow it to magnify within ourselves, and then we let it flow and go through us and out towards the others around us. That's how we're connected to everybody and everything in the whole universe. There is no end to love. Love is without limits. Think of a galaxy that's constantly expanding. Our motto on here is love draws a bigger circle that it's constantly expanding, constantly including. The Bible says God is love. Whatever your concept of God, this is an interesting thing to apply to it. So if you don't have a Judeo-Christian conceptualization of God, I challenge you to apply this to how you think about the heart of the universe or the soul of the universe and see if it matches. Does it match to think that that is love, that is the definition of it? So there's a quote that comes from Romans. It's Romans 8:38-9, which I think is really important for us to think about here. There's a quote that says, "I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. So neither death nor life, nor angels nor demons, neither our fears for today, nor our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord." So I think this is a fascinating verse. So if you're looking at it from the outside, like pretend that you're not a Christian. Maybe you're a Christian who's been in the church for your whole life. You know this like the back of your hand. I think this is an LR version of it, but just do this with me. Step outside of it for just a second and just think about what this means. What it means for you to be so connected to the love of the universe, the whole being of the universe. And that includes everybody in it, even those people that you're fighting with about the elections right now. It includes everyone. We are all connected, and this is the most basic way that we're connected is through love. And then, as Christians, we throw around like the stories of Christ and Jesus, and sometimes it's really important for us to step back and actually look at what things like this mean. So not only is this verse talking about all the things that can't separate us, there's nothing that can separate us from the universal love, but also it's an explanation that Christ was the biggest metaphor for that. He was the incarnate version of that. So I like to think of him when I think about Christ as my teacher and how he came to earth and what he's teaching and the example. He is the perfect example and also a metaphor, an allegory of love personified. So not only is God love, but Jesus is the incarnate version of that, just as an aside. What I want you to take from this is, if you are feeling a lack of love in your life or a scarcity of love in your life, what I want you to understand is that you always have access to the abundance of the love of the universe. You are not alone. You are connected and interconnected with the love that weaves throughout the whole universe. So that's all I have for today. That was a lot. It's actually a pretty long podcast today. Thanks for hanging in there if you've gotten this far. For your exercise this week, this came to me as I was actually in Target yesterday. I was walking through Target and I had my list of like 3 things that I needed. And I looked in my cart and I had like 10 things in my cart. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Where does this come into this sufficiency talk that I'm planning? And what I realized is I could start walking through the store and thinking, oh, I have enough of that. Oh, I don't need that. Oh, I have sufficient chicken in my pantry. I don't need another wad of toilet paper or Cheetos or whatever. I have sufficiency. So if you really want a challenge for this exercise, go walk through the grocery store when you're hungry and practice sufficiency. Practice the idea that you have enough and that you can just go home and eat what you want. You don't have to buy $15 million more worth of food because you're hungry. So if you're a compulsive spender, practice saying, I have sufficient at home and I don't need to stockpile X, Y, and Z. If you're a price tag reader or counter, what I want you to do is set enough money in your bank account before you go with your list of things that you know that you have more than enough to cover it. And instead of taking your calculator like you usually do and calculating every penny and dime, I want you to let go of that and practice knowing that you have sufficient money to buy what you need. I want you to practice sufficiency. And you know what? If you happen to get to the cash register and you've got a little bit over, you can put something back. That's no big deal. But the practice of letting go of the lack mindset and that you don't have enough and you have to count every penny, it's a lack mindset. And I want you to practice sufficiency mindset. You'll be happier. All right, so what I've shown you today, we've talked about sufficiency mindset, and we talked about the 5 most common scarcity mindsets, and I flipped them for you to show you the scarcity mindset and then the sufficiency mindsets that are the cure. So now we come to the part of the show where we talk about what we're listening and reading. I don't have anything that I'm watching this week. I've been too busy doing podcasts. So what I'm listening to is kind of an older song by Sister Hazel. It's called This Kind of Love. I really love this song because I think it describes like the ultimate receiving and letting love flow through you kind of song. You give it, you build it. This is perfect love. So it's just mellow and it's cool. So listen to it if you'd like. I will put the link to a YouTube video in the podcast notes. What I'm reading, one, I mentioned Lynn Twist, The Soul of Money, which, she goes a whole lot further into sufficiency with money and commercialism and what's going on with our planet, and just is an amazing teacher, author. I found her on Oprah Winfrey Super Soul Sunday. So if we can find it, I'll put the link to the Super Soul Sunday interview with Oprah on there too. But the other book I'm reading is called Effortless Mastery, Liberating the Master Musician Within. It's by Kenny Werner. And here's what the little book cover says. It says, playing music should be as simple and natural as drawing a breath. Yet most musicians are hindered by self-consciousness, apprehension, self-doubt, and stress. Does that sound familiar? Kind of like lack, right? So I was raised as a musician this way. I was raised classically. You don't miss a note. You stress about making a mistake. And I never got to the point where music flowed from me that way. So here's the rest of the jacket. Before we can truly express our inner self, we must first learn to be at peace and overcome the distractions that can make performance difficult. Kenny's remarkable work deals directly with these hindrances and presents ways to let our natural creative powers flow freely with minimal stress and effort. So I feel like that's what we're doing in our soul and in our spirit and working towards changing our mindset towards a sufficiency mindset. We're removing the blocks and allowing our natural creative love to connect us to everybody else and for sufficiency to flow from us. So next week, I'm going to be interviewing Emily Strickler about owning your own emotions to love your partner more, which is going to be completely fascinating because I am in the middle of a divorce right now. It's almost over. So that's going to be fascinating. Join us next week. Okay, my virtuosos, you have enough. I want you to remember this. You have enough of everything. You have sufficiency, and you are enough. Now go have a wonderful week. Love always, Sue. And I will see you next week in episode number 34.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Becoming Virtuosa. If you want to find out more, come check out virtuosacoaching.com. That's virtuosa with an A, coaching.com. See you next week.